very good morning to one and all, and welcome to our Saturday edition of Coffee with Ken. Now, this is going to be a short one. It's also pre-recorded, so unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to go over to the chat bar this morning and say hi to everybody. But I'm going to, just kind of imagine what sort of people will be showing up. So we'd have to say hello to Bernie and to Deborah and to Sylvester and to Anne, and maybe Narima will drop by, and Gurmeet and a few others. If I've missed you, I'm always thinking about you, so never fear. But while you're watching this at the regular time of 10:30 Pacific, I'm probably somewhere over Manitoba, flying back east to take care of some parliamentary and family business there. We have family actually arriving in Canada as students from Brazil. And they're going through the quarantine period right now, so we're going to be looking after them for a couple of weeks. I'm going to be away until the 19th, but of course, these days, particularly with all of the electronics and the Zoom and the this and the that, you can be anywhere from everywhere. And so that's, I'm still going to be in touch, obviously, even though I might not have my feet on the ground right here in Fleetwood, Port Kells. So we're coming to you pre-recorded. The Wi-Fi on the planes isn't very good, so I couldn't trust to do a live shot from there. And besides, the other passengers might get a little bit unnerved with me talking into the computer way up there in the air. So today we're just going to cover the headlines. But next Saturday we'll be live again with the regular stuff and some of the things that we're passing over this week, including what I had promised as a special on the wild Pacific salmon and some of the work that we've been doing on the Fisheries and Oceans Committee, and giving the government, I think, some really good recommendations to help restore those Pacific salmon stocks. But if we're just going to cover the headlines, boy, oh boy, do we have some really good headlines to cover. This week, we had huge announcements by the Prime Minister and the BC Premier, one on Thursday and one yesterday. As the PM is shifting back to in-person events across the country, along with some of the cabinet ministers, and of course, Premier Horrigan doing the same. It was great to have that stop yesterday in Surrey, because this is what it was all about, SkyTrain. SkyTrain, not just to the rec centre in Fleetwood, but all the way to Langley Centre. Actually, there were a couple of announcements yesterday, the biggest, of course, for us being that SkyTrain line extension to Surrey, from Surrey to Langley Centre. But there was another SkyTrain-related announcement that I'm not sure that everybody picked up on yesterday when the Prime Minister was commenting, because he was talking about the funding that the federal government is coming up with to make sure that those lines get built. And I say lines because there was another one mentioned. There was, of course, the extension from Fleetwood to Langley Centre, but he also mentioned funding to extend the new Broadway line all the way out to UBC. And as you know, the Surrey extension was supposed to only go to the rec centre in Fleetwood, and that extension now is fully funded to Langley Centre. The Broadway line was only supposed to go to Arbutus, and I was unaware that we were also thinking of funding the extra bit all the way out to the university, which is a really, really good deal. In terms of the line to Langley Centre, I think that, I remember saying a few months ago that it made sense to take it all the way because it'll make the line work better through and through. It'll probably also return us to the stature of having the world's longest automated rapid transit system, because our existing SkyTrain lines, when the Millennium Line came on, made us number one in the world. Then somebody else sort of snuck ahead of us. Since then, the Evergreen Line has come on board, as well as, of course, this extension, which I think is another 16 kilometers, and that's probably going to put us number one again. But more than that, it's what SkyTrain can do. And there have been some discussions going on. I've heard from people saying, you shouldn't worry about SkyTrain, you should just do buses. Well, the thing with SkyTrain, and people who use it regularly will know this, is that it's automated, and it isn't mixed with traffic like an LRT, which means that it can run faster and it can also run more frequently. So when SkyTrain is in full stream, you can have a train rumbling into a station every 109 seconds, and it's the equivalent of a 6 to 8 lane freeway in terms of its ability to handle people. The other thing that is really good about SkyTrain is its time reliability. Normally, when I would get on at King George Station, it would take me 20 minutes to get to Broadway and Commercial, 40 minutes to get to Waterfront. And it's pretty much the same, down to a minute here, a minute there, every time. SkyTrain is time reliable, and it's reliable overall. In fact, SkyTrain's performance the last time it was measured in 2018 came in at 96% on time, which is pretty darn good. The other thing to think about when we talk about SkyTrain and the extension in Surrey is that as Surrey edges closer and closer to being BC's biggest city, we also have, of course, the benefit of having a lot of land. Land for people to live in and land for industry to grow. Unlike Vancouver and Burnaby, and they're running out of space for just about everything except to go up, but you can't build a factory up, not very easily. And so it's probably not going to be too much longer. I would say within the next 15 years, Surrey will be the biggest city in BC. And you're going to see as many commuters coming out towards Surrey and the lower, the Fraser Valley, the south of Fraser, as you are from Surrey and Langley heading into Vancouver, Burnaby, or Coquitlam, because out here is where the jobs are going to be. Now, wanted to also kind of cut something off at the pass. Of course, what we hear almost constantly is all these rumblings about an election. We hear more rumblings from the pundits and the media than we do from the politicians, to be honest with you. But people will look at this announcement and say, oh, there it is, an election goodie. I can remind you that the funding for this in general has been around for a few years now. Back after the 2015 election, I think it was 2016, maybe 2017, we announced a fund of $180 billion to build infrastructure in Canada. And this money, the money that it'll take to extend the line all the way to Langley Centre, is basically coming out of that pot. We were waiting for business cases and things to be done here in Surrey, and that's been done. So the timing is more to do with the fact that the paperwork is done, but the money has actually been there for quite some time. So it hasn't been an off-the-cuff election goodie, let's put it that way. As we get closer to the start of construction, there's a few things we should be paying attention to, especially around the stations. There's a right way and a wrong way to build a community around a SkyTrain station. And I found out this when we were opening up the Millennium Line in my days with TransLink. And I recall doing an analysis of what was going on around the existing Expo Line stations, particularly in Vancouver and Burnaby. So for instance, at the Joyce Collingwood station, there'd been complaints all over the place about higher levels of crime and disorder. Well, when we did the analysis, we found that there were methadone clinics and needle exchanges, pizza by the slice shops. I think there was a couple of pawn shops and XXX videos. I mean, all of these are typical of the businesses that attract a particular kind of clientele, and a clientele that's normally not terribly welcome in most communities. So it's very obvious that that's the sort of thing you're very aware of when you allow things to be built around SkyTrain stations. And so that's the sort of thing I'm going to be having a very close look at as all of the details come together for that great new SkyTrain line, and it will be great, right through Fleetwood all the way to Langley Centre. Now, there was another announcement this time on Thursday, and this was out in Coquitlam. I went out for this one as well, and it has to do with a program that we announced in Budget 2021, and that's early learning and childcare. And on Thursday morning, Prime Minister Trudeau and Premier Horgan were in Coquitlam to announce that BC would be the first provincial partner to sign on to the Federal Early Education and Child Care Program. And this is so typical because, as I've mentioned a few times, one of the great things about BC and about Metro Vancouver and, about the place I used to work at TransLink Every time there's a whiff of federal funding being available, they're ready with a program or a project, ready to go, which is why in many, many cases, BC is the first to be involved in a partnership with the federal government to get something done. And this is really cool, and it works to our advantage time after time. In the case of the Early Learning and Childcare Program, this will be really, really important for families with kids under 6 years old. It'll be a lift in the number of childcare spaces because the province and the federal government are going to make sure that more are available. The province is also going to take on the job of training more childcare providers so that that education piece, the learning piece while the kids are in daycare, will be much better. They will be learning things, and when it's time to go into grade 1, they're going to be more than ready for that. And of course, the big plus will be for single parents, a lot of mums particularly, who may not have access to the best of jobs. And certainly when you're staring down $1,200 to $1,500 a month per child for daycare, you can't go to work because you can't afford to pay daycare and go to work and feed your family. So this program, the Early Learning and Childcare Program that BC and the federal government are partnering on, will do one important thing almost right away. By the end of next year, childcare expenses at the spaces involved in the program will be cut in half, which means that every family that has youngsters, little kids, will be saving a lot of money. And the intention is, within the next few years, perhaps by 2025, 2026, that we will have a program in place in BC and hopefully right across Canada that will duplicate what Quebec has done for years. Quebec has had $10 a day daycare. So if you're sitting there now and you're spending hundreds, if not over $1,000 a month, imagine how good things are going to be when we get this down to $10 a day for you. And that's something that we're absolutely going to be working on. Now, as I mentioned, we're pre-recorded today, so if you notice I'm not saying hello and good morning to everybody, and the fact that you linked in via YouTube instead of seeing this live, all signs, right? So we're doing it this week. It's going to be short this week. We're going to cover the COVID situation and wrap her up. Next week, though, we'll be back to live and back to normal. But for the time being, let's have a look at the COVID situation. And here's what the world looks like right now. 185, almost 186 million cases around the world, and over 4 million people have died. The United States leads in the number of cases and the number of people who've passed away. They are being challenged in those statistics, and not in a good way, by India, and Brazil is not far behind. And as we look at the world in total, if we look over here, what you see is, there was the initial back last spring, and we had the second wave, and then we had the third wave, and then we came down, and this is looking a little troubling. There's a bit of a lift here, so we're going to have to keep an eye on that. That's around the world. Now, if we look, for instance, at India, what we see is a very startling drop in the number of cases and the number of fatalities. In Brazil, not so much. Not so much. Things are not very good at all. If we scroll way, way down the list here to around here, we find, oops, that's Chechnya. We don't need that. Canada, there we go. So Canada, again, we've had first wave, second wave, third wave. Not much of an indication that things are going the wrong way for us. And I think that probably has an awful lot to do with the fact that we are doing a great job at being vaccinated and getting vaccinated. So if we look at our British Columbia statistics, we've administered over 5.5 million doses, with another million or more in the bank, ready to go into arms just about any time. Today's new cases, 45, currently in critical care, 19. It wasn't that long ago that we were close to 200 people in critical care. Well over 100 anyway. So obviously things have gotten an awful lot better. And of course the idea is that we want to keep it that way. In terms of vaccines, here we are right now having distributed almost 51 million doses in Canada. Now, when we get to, let's say, around the 70 million dose mark, we're going to be at a place where we will have on hand, or will have had on hand, 2 doses for every Canadian eligible to get a vaccine. And very clearly, once we get everybody 2-dosed, we're going to have the herd immunity, people are going to be safe, and this is where we can really get down and really open things up. We noted last week, by the way, that BC's 4th stage for opening up will not happen before September the 7th. But at the rate we're going, and we'll show you the graph in just a second, we're going to have everybody substantially with 2 doses well before then, and that's a very good thing. If we look at the deliveries coming up, last week was a bit of a slow one. You can see here that it was just under 900,000 doses of Pfizer arrived in Canada. Well, big lift this coming week, 1.4 million, double that the week after, and even more the week after that. And that's Pfizer. In terms of Moderna, they have been increasing their supplies to Canada because we've been getting them now from the United States. A little slow in the last week. We're probably going to see a bit more of a lift, hopefully. AstraZeneca, not that much coming into the country. We got the initial wave in, people got their first shots, and we brought in more AstraZeneca so that the people who wanted their second shot of AZ could definitely get it. So overall, the planet has made pretty good progress. We're doing our best to beat back the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of good news in many places, but in some cases, there have been some, maybe some troubling developments. Look at this tweet out of England. And what you see here is that in spite of the fact that England has done a really good job with their shutdowns, not a bad job with their vaccinations, all of a sudden now we're dealing with a really substantial lift in the number of daily cases, over 26,000. And that's got to be troubling because obviously when you've got that, you have more people spreading the virus, and it's a sign that things could easily get out of control again. The big thing in England right now, or in Great Britain, of course, is the vaccination rate. They do not have anything near our rate of vaccines, in arms, and that's holding them back. And we've heard that actually Denmark and Sweden are facing similar challenges. And it's with the Delta variant. And this is the variant that we think started in India and has spread around. It's become kind of the dominant one. And in fact, it accounts for about 93% of the cases right now in the US, and a sizable number of any new ones here in Canada. That said, we're also hearing about a new strain, the Lambda variant. They're going through and they're picking Greek letters to assign to the various strains of the COVID-19 virus. So Lambda was first identified in Peru in late 2020, and it's become dominant there and in Chile. And with the mess that Brazil is in, there's a very good chance that the Lambda variant is going to be taking over there. And as we've said a few times, we can be smug and say, Canada's doing okay, but we really do have to help those other countries with their vaccinations, with whatever health measures we can, help them along with, simply because if you have a whole bunch of people making each other sick, then you have the conditions for these new variants to come along. And what we don't want, well, there's 2 things we don't want. We don't want to run out of letters in the Greek alphabet, but most importantly, we don't want to come up with a new variant that our current vaccines can't handle. And you've already heard, in fact, some discussions about perhaps some booster shots from Pfizer. Definitely a possibility. In Canada, here's where we are right now. Eligible Canadians, 78% of us have received the first dose, 40% the second dose. And the second dose is coming up by about 10% a week. So you can see within the next 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to be very, very highly double dosed in Canada. The one thing that's worrying people right now, though, is that the rate of those first doses has started to drop. And we knew that by the time we reached around 80% with first doses, we were then running into the people who were hesitant to get vaccinated, and some who, for whatever reason, ideological or perhaps medical, were just definitely not going to be vaccinated. So we're perhaps starting to bump up to the ceiling as to where we can get, but I think we still have another 6 or 7 percentage points in us. So if you're sitting there and you're wondering, I don't know, maybe I'm not going to get that first dose. No, get it. Because as things open up again, and as we start to welcome people into the country, first starting with those fully vaccinated, you can't forget that somebody who's fully vaccinated, 2 doses, waiting those 2 weeks after the second dose, can still shed the virus. And if you're not vaccinated, you can catch COVID-19, and it is not pleasant for a lot of people who get it. So think about that. Also, if you've had your first dose and then you figure, I'm not going to bother with the second one, I hear that, you don't feel very good after you get it. No. Bite the bullet, get the second dose, because that does give you the kind of protection that you're going to need to ward off the Delta variant, and apparently 2 doses does a pretty good job of that, and all of the other things that have come along. There have been many, many different variants, and people with the double dose are in very, very good shape. So that's the last item, I think, on our headline edition of Coffee with Ken this week. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention to you. There are some new rules coming down as of the 19th. So that'll be a week Monday for the long-term care facilities. And people who have had relatives in long-term care, this is some really good news. Have a look. So there you go. That's a very abbreviated edition, a pre-recorded one with Coffee with Ken. So thank you all for tuning in. You'll notice, of course, that you accessed this one today via a YouTube link. So that's pretty unusual for us. We will be back next Saturday, and we will be live, and we will cover some of the things that we've kind of put off to the side this week, because there's a lot of other really neat little newsy bits that hopefully you're going to find interesting. And I especially want you to hear what's up with our wild Pacific salmon, because there was news, of course, that the salmon harvest has been cut back by 60%. That means hard time for some folks. Not as hard, though, as when John Crosby, who was the fisheries minister with Brian Mulroney, had to go into the processors and down in the docks in Newfoundland and around Atlantic Canada and say, boys, we're shutting her down. And that was, of course, the end of the cod fishery. We don't want to get to that point, but unless we do something, that's where we're headed. So in any event, I trust you're going to have yourself a terrific weekend. Still stay cool. It's still a little hot from time to time. Water your plants, and if there's a tree out in the boulevard, give it a shot of water as well if you can. Surrey watering regulations let you do that if you're standing there with a handheld hose. And just look after each other, and we will see you for sure next Saturday morning, 10:30 Pacific, for our Coffee with Ken session. Take care.